Hi, I'm Katie Crane, and this is the Pilates Lounge. Hi everyone, my name's Katie Crane, the Pilates professional. Welcome to another episode of the Pilates Lounge podcast. Today I am speaking with Dinah Siman. Now Dinah is joining us all the way from the UK, so thank you so much for joining us. And I found her on Instagram of all places, as we do these days, the wonderful world of the web. And I loved the content that Dinah was sharing, in particular around menopause. And so, being somebody who is going through menopause myself right now, I want you to tell me all the answers about what's happening in my body. But, I think what happens as we go through menopause ourselves, we realize just how much our body is both potentially going to change, but also how we are so capable of change. And I love the message that Dinah shares with her listeners and her watchers. So I've invited her onto the show today simply because I am pretty sure that she's going to end up being a very well-known person in the menopause space when it comes to Pilates, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But Dinah has been teaching for over 20 years, and she was first engaging in understanding menopause simply by teaching women who were going through menopause themselves. And of course, which, like I just said, often the missing link is the lack of understanding about menopause. And so for this reason, she really prides herself on providing clients with care, compassion, support, precision, safety, and progress when it comes to working with menopause. Now, Dinah's got first-hand experience, and she is turning that knowledge into wisdom, which is such a wonderful thing to be doing for the community. So whether or not you are going through menopause, you've gone through menopause, I can guarantee it's going to happen at some stage, ladies. So the more we understand about menopause, I believe before we get there, then the more empowered we can be to move through this stage of life. So thank you so much for joining me, Donna. I'm so excited for you to share your experience with us. I would love to hand the floor over to you so that you can just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, where you are right now, and a little bit about your journey.
Hello, Katie. Thank you, first of all, very much for inviting me on your podcast. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak to a wider audience because, as you said, this is a passion that I have. And sharing the information with as many teachers as well as our clients as possible is really, really important to me. You're right in that my teaching experience really prompted me to think about this demographic even more. So I started teaching in about 1997, 8, something like that. And I was in my early 30s myself. So I was oblivious really to what was happening in some ways. But I was very conscious as I was progressing in my teaching career that I'd got a lot of women in front of me who were struggling with different things happening to them. So I was teaching these women, my experiences in teaching women, but just as a side note, we should remember that menopause, the term, is a very inclusive term. It includes trans people and non-binary people as well. And it's really important to remember that. But my own personal experience has all been teaching women in this demographic. So there I was in my early 30s, teaching these women who were into their 50s, mostly late 40s, 50s. And I opened my first studio in 2001, just before, about sort of 6 to 8 months before the 2002 report came out, which damned hormone replacement therapy. And at that point, when that happened, I could literally see overnight the women who'd been on hormone replacement therapy, what happened to them when they came off it. So the changes were very, very obvious. But again, it was at a time when nobody talked about it. Nobody really discussed it other than, can't use that because it's going to cause breast cancer, which we now know, of course, was a completely wrong information, but that was how it was interpreted at the time. So over the last 25 years, my experience with this demographic has been, in many ways, trying to help women manage problems which keep coming up. And I kept seeing repetitive problems like frozen shoulder or Achilles tendonitis within this demographic. And nobody was actually talking about any hormonal component. So I felt very much like I was watching the actors in a play, but not seeing the scenery. And even when they went to their GPs or physiotherapists, again, nobody mentioned whether or not the hormonal changes were having an impact. Yet so many things which I was observing, the dizziness, the dry skin, seemed to be all related. So all of this was going on, and I was trying to find more information, and it wasn't really there. And then, of course, when I got to my own perimenopause, light bulb moments started to happen, and I began to really appreciate what happens in the body because you feel it. And as movement teachers, we are all so tuned into our bodies, body awareness, that, this can become something which really changes your life.
Yeah, I'm 48 or 49 this year. I can't remember. But definitely, in the last 5 years, big changes are happening. And doesn't it just give you like such a different perspective on the bodies that you had been working with, when you first started and you were in your 30s and you're there working with those perimenopausal or those menopausal women, like how has that changed your perspective having now gone through the experience yourself?
Well, I think I'm actually just turned 60 in May, and my perimenopause was quite late for various reasons. Everybody's different. So I didn't really get to the perimenopause till my late 40s through the first part of my 50s. And I didn't actually get to my menopause till I was 56, which is quite late. But what you get in your body can reveal so much. I mean, I'm fortunate that as that was happening to me, there was beginning to be more information. So I was very aware that the symptoms I was experiencing, like phenomenally itchy skin, I can remember being one of the first symptoms, which you can't do anything about. You can't stop it. Scratching isn't going to make any difference. Dry eyes, fainting, dizziness, constant UTIs. I knew all of these were symptoms, perimenopause symptoms. I was aware of that. And I was very conscious with my clients of trying to refer them on to specialists if I could, but I didn't do that for myself, not for a long time, because I think like many teachers, we're so busy with what we're doing. And also, depending on how the culture you've grown up with around menopause, there's a big tendency still to think, okay, this is completely natural, which it is. It's a natural physiological event. Any person born with ovaries will have a menopause. So I just need to get through it. And if you don't fully understand how this is like a complete reset in your hormonal composition in your body, that it's going to become a new state of being, then there's a tendency to think this is something, I'm going to go through it and I'm going to come out the other side, which is a misconception because we go into menopause. In fact, we end up going into postmenopause, then we stay there. And some women adapt really easily and others don't. And I think there can be such a tendency when you're in a caring profession, caring for your clients, you're possibly caring for your own children, maybe you're caring for elderly parents, you can have little children, you can have teenagers, or you've got animals you're looking after, whatever it is, your energies are going out and it's easy not to bring them back in. And there's something about the hormonal shifts, which mean it can get very tricky sometimes to actually decide what to do, how to help yourself. So it's a time of huge transformation. And some people adjust to it easily and others don't. And I think that the term menopause is a little confusing too, because you just mentioned the perimenopause, which is that phase leading up to menopause. And that can last anything from 3 months to 10 years. Your actual menopause is only one day in your life, but we use the term menopause to cover everything. And after that one day, which if you're over 50 is a year and the day after that year of no periods, Then you are in your postmenopause, and that's it. You're in postmenopause for the rest of your life. So you go into a new phase. You don't go through it and you don't come out of it. And I think actually the language is important because, recognizing that you need help and support as a teacher, as your clients do as well, is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And can you explain a little bit more in detail, so we know that, menopause, it's ultimately, it's one day, it's regarded, you're in menopause once you haven't menstruated for 12 months and one day. And then how does that shift of hormones, the whole lead up and then going into menopause, how does that affect our joints, our tendons, ligaments?
Yeah. Okay. So again, if I relate this to my teaching experience over the years, and I'm sure many other teachers relate to this, that you have clients who come to you and they've got pain. They've got generalized pain. They've got joint pain. And maybe they go to see their GP because we will suggest, hopefully, if they've got pain, that we refer them on because that's what we do in our scope of practice. They see their GP, maybe they have blood tests to check for inflammatory markers and everything comes back, no, you're fine, you don't have any conditions recognizable through these markers, but there is this ongoing pain. And I think the hormonal component has been the missing link for so many people because our hormones, estrogen and testosterone is a female hormone, are anti-inflammatories. And so once you start to lose the anti-inflammatory nature of those hormones, then things can start to happen. So they act as anti-inflammatories throughout the whole system, which means definitely in the organ system. And for example, heart disease, before we have menopause, women have much lower rates of heart disease than men. After that, after menopause, it rises enormously. And heart disease is one of the biggest killers of women. And when it comes to pain, some women are going to start feeling more pain. And it might be that, I've taught women who have been in such a state that they've had MRI scans which show nothing particular in terms of damage, just your average wear and tear, which we hear about a lot, but they can hardly move. And this link, recognizing that hormones give us this decrease in inflammatory pain, hasn't necessarily been made. A lot of the time we're told this is aging. And, yes, of course there is aging, but there is an expression, inflammaging, now, which is looking at how inflammation increases as we age. And if you look at the timing of the menopause in midlife, when more and more pain starts to creep in, then that link, the hormonal link, is now beginning to be made more clearly. So some women who get diagnosed with fibromyalgia, which as we know is pain in many places, actually are experiencing muscle and joint pain through perimenopause. And it now has I think it's called the musculoskeletal syndrome of menopause. It's been given a title, a name, and many more doctors in social media are talking about it. Whether that is percolating through to our GPs around the world, our general practitioners, is another matter, because of course the person that when we say to our clients, I think you should go and see your doctor, they're going to see their general practitioner. That's their first port of call. And sometimes that can be a little bit tricky because they might come back with, there's nothing wrong with me, and yet they have that pain. So I think the thing is, and one of the menopause specialists I work with said this to me, once you've seen it, you can't not see it. Once you recognize that hormones have an influence to play, then you just start to look and see, okay, let me just reflect on this client. I recorded a podcast with Dr. Louise Newson back in about 2021, I think. So she is the doctor in the UK who has created the Balance app, which is a free global app for menopause. And she has a huge website. She has a practice fairly near me. And I was talking to her about Pilates and about menopause. And I was sharing with her that Actually, sorry, no, that's the wrong way around. I was talking to her first. We recorded the podcast. That came out. And then I had a message from a doctor, from a GP, who said to me, I've listened to your podcast with Dr. Louise Newson, and I've shared it with the physiotherapist in our practice. And he's listened to it. And he was, to quote her words, blown away by the information, which wasn't rocket science. It was just me talking about what I've just said to you, and my observations, and looking at conditions and what I've observed with women and how they behave and what happens to them. And he had never, ever considered hormones as a factor in dealing with this demographic. And to his credit, he was going to go off and review every patient in the light of menopause. Now, I think what's good for us as teachers to know is that whilst we haven't had any education on it, we're not the only ones. Unless you're a physiotherapist who goes into women's health in the UK, and I think it's similar in other parts of the world, then you're not going to be learning about menopause, or you haven't been. Hopefully that's going to change, because it's all about education and understanding. And the more you read about it and understand it, and if you're going to experience it yourself and you get that experience, the more you kind of go, how can this have been ignored so much? Just accepted as just something you get on with, and it's part of aging. Because essentially, and again, doesn't sound great, but this is how it is sometimes described by menopause specialists. The ovaries, where we have the production of estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone, are the first organ to fail. So it's organ failure. And then your body has to deal with the consequences. I'm talking to you about the demographic who are sort of in their 40s to 50s. But of course, this can happen to far younger people, women in their 20s, 30s, teenagers. It's a really, big area. And so if we have got some information about it and understanding about it, then it's sort of like, okay, this is in the back of my mind. So if I'm dealing with a new client, for example, recently I had a new client who's in her 70s, but as she talked to me about what had happened to her in the past 10, 15 years, what I'm hearing is the knock-on effect of loss of her hormones and how that's then created more pain issues, which nobody can really deal with because it's inflammatory pain, heart conditions, and many of our clients suddenly start to take statins, or they have blood pressure issues. And all of these things are conditions which can arise out of the change in the hormonal content in our body. So that's where the lifestyle element also, and genetics, of course, are very important, because they all play a role. So menopause itself is not a disease, but for some women, it then predisposes them to other conditions. So having that awareness for yourself and for your clients, I think I just think it's crucial. And I personally think it's something we should have more at the beginning of our teaching career, because the moment you start teaching, the majority of us are going to be teaching somebody on this scale.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think, in the years that I've been teaching, the majority of our clients have always been, kind of women 35 plus, that's just the people who come to Pilates,
Exactly.
So I've only just started to understand about hormones myself, in the last 5 years. And there's so many, light bulb moments of now, working with women with bursitis, with frozen shoulder, they're probably two of the most common ones, but also, with stress as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And lack of sleep and anxiety, all of these things play into it without a doubt. Connective tissue issues. And for lots of teachers, lots of us are hypermobile. Or we've done so much movement, we've generated more injuries in our body because we love movement, and we wouldn't have it any other way. But, whilst we manage those injuries and we manage the connective tissue disorders with our movement practice very often, because as teachers, we have the skills, we have that skill set. When we lose our hormones, that can just blow everything apart. Suddenly the pain levels, which you didn't know you were going to have, you've got. In places where, okay, you may have had an old injury, suddenly that completely flares up, or your hypermobility gets dramatically worse. For some women, it gets better, but, it's a very variable thing. I think the research into the impact of hormones on connective tissue is really going to expand in the coming years. I mean, the fascial work is so important. And I know there has been some research on young female athletes on knee injuries in ligaments during the hormonal cycle. But, this influence of hormones is far greater than anybody has thought about, I think. And in terms of menopause, it's massive.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you see as some common misconceptions that are around menopause?
Well, the first one is definitely that you go through it. I mean, the classic one, which I still hear, is, "Oh yeah, I've sailed through menopause, no problems at all. I did that years ago." Those are some of the classic ones. And of course, again, if you think about education on menopause, when are women going to get it? They just haven't. It hasn't been there, and they haven't been offered it. So you just continue the stories from your cultural background, from your family, from your community. You just continue that, understandably. And if your mother didn't talk about it or your aunt didn't talk about it, then you probably won't talk about it. So a lot of it depends on where you come from. But the classic one, as in, "Oh, I sailed through menopause," I have that a lot with some of my slightly older ladies. And then if, you get to know them and you're talking, you say, "So how's your sleep?" "Oh, I can't sleep. My sleep's terrible." "How's your anxiety?" "Oh, my anxiety levels are awful." And this all begins with the loss of hormones. They trace it back to when their hormones changed. So some things begin at this point, but of course it's easy not to relate them. If you don't understand what the potential symptoms of menopause are, then you're not going to join the dots together. And you can easily see things as separate issues. And it's also important to remember that whilst, we have this amazing thing called the symptom checker, and in Australia, Jean Hale's clinics have the symptom checker. You can download it from the internet. The original one was called the Green Climacteric Scale. And this is how menopause over the age of 45 is diagnosed. And you can do that yourself. You can have that, and you can fill it out, and you can track your symptoms. These are called short-term symptoms of menopause. But, for many women, they don't go away. So the anxiety doesn't go away, and they might get treated with antidepressants. And the sleep issues don't go away. And I have a 96-year-old aunt who still gets hot flushes. So, not all the time, but every now and again. I can remember visiting her in the last year or so and her saying, "Had these terrible hot flushes, dear. I don't know why. I mean, I went through all of that years ago." But your body has got this different composition of hormones, and it's not got a clear cutoff point. It's not a neat event. And I think that's really important to understand, that this change has a long-term impact on your ongoing health. So that's why it's important to understand it, have the information about it, also to understand the time it takes. We're talking about perimenopause now. People didn't use the word perimenopause. It wasn't something I'd heard for years in my 30s and into my 40s. But, just like puberty takes a long time, pregnancy takes time, perimenopause takes a long time. So really understanding that this is not sort of like a one thing that has to be got through, but actually this is the ongoing change in your state of being, which means you need to address your health and well-being through your exercise, through how you feed yourself, both in terms of literal food and what you're doing, your sleep, your stress levels. In many ways, it's a great time of reinvention, if you like, or transformation, for sure. And knowing that there is support, you can get help. Suffering, we have to go through menopause if we've got ovaries, but you don't have to suffer. And I think that's another misconception, that, we have to suffer, we have to get through it. No, we don't. We can get help and support. It's not always straightforward to get, but you can. And to understand that hormone replacement therapy, which for the last 22 years has been considered as a really bad thing, does not cause breast cancer. And actually the type that was used now around the world, which is transdermal estrogen and it's called body identical. So both the estrogen and the progesterone come from yams. It's the same molecular structure as our own hormones. It's a very safe way of supporting your body. That we have choices. We do have choices.
Yeah, well, I really hope that the landscape is changing, that women, I feel like there's more of a voice. I feel like there's, more people are talking about it freely. I remember when my mother went through menopause, goodness me, like she suffered, but she, like you say, she suffered in silence. It was, it was almost like, she had done something wrong all of her life, and here, now you have to take this,
Yeah.
I do feel like now, there's more of an open conversation. It almost feels like, and maybe it's, you get to a certain time of your life as well, and then you're like, well, what the heck, I'm going to talk about it anyway because, it's happening. I feel like the same happened when I was having children. There was all this secret women's business that I didn't understand. And then I'm like, goodness me, if only somebody had told me that it was going to, this was going to be like this. But it's almost like nobody can tell you all of it until you go through the experience. But if we can at least start a dialogue,
exactly,
so that people don't feel like they're weird or they're the only ones.
Yeah. Oh, completely. Totally agree with you. And I think the other thing is because the personal experience can be so varied. Say, my experience happened to be quite severe, which in many ways I'm very grateful for because I experienced so many symptoms and things got so bad that I learned so much. And it's one of the reasons that I felt really passionate about sharing this with teachers to try and make their lives easier, to try and help them in the supporting of their clients. But if you happen to have a very easy menopause, then it's not necessarily easy to put yourself in somebody else's position. And I think that's important. And as teachers, we're often dealing with people who've got body problems, and we need to have empathy. We need to be able to listen and understand. And so if our personal experience was that, oh, well, I didn't, I had a couple of hot flushes, but I'm fine, then, that it can make you think, well, what's all the fuss? But again, if you really look into what the type of symptoms, the range of symptoms we have in our bodies from perimenopause, from this change in hormones, it might be that you realize actually you've experienced more symptoms than you knew, but you just haven't linked them together. Like sleep, like anxiety, like dizziness, this sort of thing. So I think it's really important that we listen to our clients, and also we listen to what they're not saying, because if they're saying to us, oh, I've got this joint pain, or, I can't sleep, and, I'm going for treatment for anxiety, then what are you hearing? And if they're in this demographic, what are you hearing? That's important too, to recognize that whilst that client might not be saying to you, I think I've got ongoing menopause symptoms, you may be hearing that, and that might be going on. And so sometimes with clients, listening to them, we can say, look, have you thought about speaking to a women's health specialist within your GP practice to talk about what's happening in terms of your menopause? It's up to the client if they then follow that up or not. But our medical system tends to silo conditions, and the GP is the person who links them all together. But in our role as educators, we can assist and help and support with information, where to go to find information if what we are seeing and what we are hearing and witnessing, our clients got brain fog, they've got pain, these different things. They've got sudden onset of migraine, they've developed allergies. All of these, if you know that these are symptoms of menopause, then, referring your client to their GP to talk about it is really helpful. Because, of course, certain things need to be checked out. Heart palpitations are a very common perimenopause symptom. But, of course, these conditions need to be checked out to make sure there isn't another underlying thing going on. But if there's a whole multitude of symptoms and your client goes off to the GP, then they can discuss this as a whole rather than isolating the symptoms.
Mm. And so say, like for our instructors or our movement educators who are listening, say if I took, a 26-year-old body and then I took a 45 or 55-year-old body, exactly the same people, same body composition, everything. How would you be changing what you're doing with them in a studio setting to support them going through changes?
Yeah. Okay. That's a tricky one, isn't it? Because it depends what they present with. I mean, I don't know about in your teaching, but for me, generally, people who come to me are coming because they've got pain or they've got joint issues or they feel stiffness or their physio's told them to come. So they're already coming with something. And if, for example, say I had somebody who didn't have anything specific, but they're in the menopause demographic, then I know I need to keep working on their strength because we lose muscle mass. So I'm going to try and keep increasing what they're working with. If they're starting on a lighter load, and then we're going to try and increase it. If we were doing mat work, we would increase the weights gradually, because not only do I want their muscle strength to increase, but their bone loading, because of course, once you get into the postmenopause, then you are at a higher risk of loss of bone density. So that's going to happen. We're going to be working on balance, because many women with menopause start to lose the ability to stand up and be secure. And coordination, that's another one which can go. Focus, mobility, pelvic floor health, big time. Pelvic floors can suffer a lot. So genitourinary syndrome of menopause is a whole section on a menopause symptom checker, looking at what's happening to the tissue in the vagina and in the urinary tract. And the pelvic floor is very important in that. So all of these areas I would be considering and trying to have a conversation with that older client to know whether or not there are any issues that they're not talking about. Because if women don't talk about menopause, they often it's more taboo to talk about what's happening in their pelvic floor and their bladder. But urinary incontinence, stress incontinence can start to creep in. There's prolapse issues get worse. And women start to adjust their lives to this instead of actually necessarily seeking help for those conditions. So all of those are going to be in the back of my mind. My 26-year-old comes in and doesn't have anything apparent going on. Of course, you want to give them a good workout. But again, are they hypermobile? The usual things. You're looking at all these different things. What is it that individual needs to work on? So you've got that sense of the hormonal shift, but you've also got, what does that bring when you're looking at the older client? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm similar. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're the same in studio. Most people come in with complex conditions. I'd certainly find that with my menopausal women, once we've gotten there, good joint, alignment, good joint placement, then I am working much more than what I used to be on loading them up more, So I used to, before I understood the hormones, I was almost like scared to load the older women up like I was going to hurt them. But now I feel it's the opposite. I'm actually helping them by teaching them how to load up safely, because we lose, I forget what the percentage is, but every decade we're losing muscles, a percent of muscle mass.
Yeah, totally. And sarcopenia, that loss of muscle mass and function, it's considered is probably something which begins at menopause with the loss of hormones. So you're absolutely right. Provided they are safe, they understand what they're doing, they haven't got conditions which are precluding loading up, then that's exactly what I do. You want to increase the load, increase the challenge, not decrease it. And I agree with you. There's been this tendency of, we need to be, kid gloves around these people. But a lot of them have needed that, If you've got somebody who, I can think over the last 23 years, 5 years, women who have had severe osteoporosis who've come to me. And yes, you've actually got to be really careful. Absolutely, you've got to be careful, because if they don't have the principles in place, then the loading is not going to be good. And we know that. And I think that's one of the gifts of Pilates, the teaching of the technique, the ability to modify every exercise so that you can start at the point that that person is coming in at, and then you can progress. And I think, if we get 26-year-olds coming in, and I have to say, where I am, I don't get so many 26-year-olds, but I know it's happening more and more, then it's brilliant, because if they learn this foundational technique in their 20s and really understand it and get the body awareness, then they're going to take that into everything. And it means ultimately in the next generation, this sort of work is going to be much more manageable.
Yeah, hands down. I absolutely agree as well. What are some, like we briefly touched on them, some commonalities that you really see in women going through menopause, as far as like common injuries. Like I know I see a frozen shoulder is one that I'll often ask somebody, have you had your hormones checked lately? And if it's a no, I'm like, off to your GP, go and get, go and get a complete hormone panel. In Australia, we call it a biological GP, where they get a very complete hormone panel to know exactly where you're at. And same with, I find hip bursitis is a big one. Are there others that you think are common to the changes in the hormones?
That you have that potential to go and have that kind of screening, because here in the UK it's a bit different. They, in terms of blood tests for perimenopause or hormonal status, they are only conducted under the age of 45, or they should only be. That's the guideline here, because of course, if you are over 45, your hormone levels can be doing this in the day. So in the morning, it might suggest that you are perimenopausal. In the afternoon, it might suggest you're not. So they go very much on symptoms. But if you're below that age, then yes, the screening is done for different hormones for sure. Absolutely. Frozen shoulder is a biggie, and it's one of the ones which I used to look at over the years. I remember having one client who had a frozen shoulder, and then she had a frozen other shoulder, and this took best part of 5 years of her life. And, only recently I read an article which was discussing frozen shoulder, and nothing was mentioned about hormones. So I was thinking, any minute now, I'm going to read, any minute now, because there is some research now, I know, out of Duke University in North Carolina, which has looked at the role of hormones on frozen shoulder, and the fact that the biggest demographic of frozen shoulder is women age 40 to 70, 70, it's not 50, it's 70. Of course, men can get a frozen shoulder, but how many men have you come across with a frozen shoulder? Not many. It's not that it's not available to others, but the biggest demographic is that menopausal demographic. And why it's taken so long for people to go, okay, let's look at the hormones and accept that actually this is symptomatic of menopause. And menopause specialists view it as a symptom of menopause. And the research is looking at how women who are on hormone replacement therapy fare compared with those who are not. So definitely frozen shoulder. Connective tissue issues. So Achilles tendonitis, very common. Plantar fasciitis, very common. Carpal tunnel syndrome. And again, carpal tunnel syndrome is something which women having had a baby are open to getting. They can get it. I had it after my second baby. And it's acknowledged as something which comes after this big hormonal shift. And you can look at postpartum as a time when there's a mini menopause, if you like, because we have this massive drop in hormones. So frozen shoulder can happen at that stage as well. Loss of bone density. But of course, women who are young will rebuild that. If they are older, say you're 47, 48, have a baby, that can actually sometimes push a woman into menopause. So, it depends where you're at in terms of your own hormones. So these kind of conditions we see. And what else do we get? Oh, we get lots of the pain, the joint pain. That comes up a lot. Fibromyalgia comes up a lot. I would say any tendonitis, tendinopathies, they happen a lot. Old injuries flaring up. You see that a lot. We start to get women coming in who've got IBS issues, never had them before, and that's starting to happen. The brain fog you'll start to see when you're teaching women. You may even find sometimes they forget to turn up to appointments, this kind of thing. The migraine, the allergies. But in terms of movement of the body, stiffness, pain, that comes up a lot. Generalized pain, which is just not identified. I would say that if you have a client in this demographic and they start to get connective tissue issues, then that's a red flag to consider for sure. And you find that, knee pain, big one, very common. Joint pains, toes and knees. Knees are a biggie. That happens a lot because, knees, shoulders, all these joints take a lot of wear and tear. And if you've suddenly lost that anti-inflammatory effect of your hormones, the pain may well have been masked. It's going to come out.
And so is it all of the sex hormones that are anti-inflammatory, or specifically like estrogen, or
Estrogen and
how does
testosterone
it
in
work?
particular. Estrogen and testosterone are
Okay.
anti-inflammatories. Yeah. And testosterone is the first hormone as females that we start to lose in our 30s. So that's going down. And again, you can say you are teaching a slightly younger demographic, but for example, you have women in their 30s who do a lot of high impact exercise and they're accustomed to doing it. And suddenly they start to get injured. So sudden injuries, onset of sudden injuries, that's another red flag. Okay, what's happening here?
All right. So how do you think we can empower women as we age? I mean, like with all of these things that we can look forward to, like it could be a horror story, right? So how do we empower women? What's the conversation
Oh,
that we should be
completely. I
having?
mean, I agree with you because when I teach my CPD, the first part, I every now and again I say, look, it sounds really awful, because there's so much, I talk a lot about the history and the culture and, how things have been. But I actually think that we're at a great time because there is so much more information available. And the conversation, as you said, has opened up. The conversation is happening. I think it's easy on social media to think it's happening loads when it's not. Maybe on social media it is, that's a bubble. But this is why I think for us as teachers, we are ideally placed to support others, also ourselves. For me, it's really important that teachers look after themselves because I've seen so many teachers burn out over the years. Many teachers are self-employed, working on their own. I've spent years working on my own. Sometimes I've had other teachers with me and I've mentored teachers for different schools. But fundamentally, you're responsible for your business. This is my studio. I need to run it. And if we are suffering in our bodies, how are we going to do that? And if we don't understand why we're suffering and we don't look for help, how are we going to do it? So for me, it's very much about education because this does not have to be a time when it's the end of everything positive in life, but it can feel that way. So if you understand, one, what the symptoms can be, two, where you find help, three, that you are not failing in finding help, there are no medals for suffering. And four, this can open up more opportunities for you. You can overhaul how you're looking after yourself. Then it can be viewed as a time of positive transformation. And, hormone replacement therapy, which has had such a bad press, one of the things about it is not a magic pill in the sense that yes, it will replace your hormones and it will help manage your symptoms. It will reduce a lot of the symptoms. And for me personally, it has been an absolute godsend. But you still have to look after yourself. So you still have to look what you eat. You still have to make sure you get enough sleep, that there's not too much stress in your life, that you exercise. Because otherwise it's not going to work optimally. It can't. Just like your own hormones don't. So I think that's where it's really actually a great thing because it's all about your self-responsibility. It's an opportunity for you to look after yourself, not call it selfish, call it looking after yourself, self-care, to look at your boundaries, to look at how you are working with yourself. This work we do is to help. Just teaching other people is about empowering them in their bodies. Empower yourself as well. And this education is part of that ongoing process.
I do wonder, if this is a Western issue or is it global? Because, well, I spend a lot of time in Indonesia and, there's the elderly in Indonesia are treated very differently to the elderly in my society. Like they are with family, they are revered, people go to them for their wisdom, for their life skills. Whereas in my culture, I feel like, you've had your children, you send them off to university or they move out of home and you're discarded. Or there's that sense of, empty nester being discarded. I do wonder if that's part of the experience that women are having.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think, that's why it's really important. And I talk about this in the book to look at your own community, look at your own culture, look at where you've come from. And I've got teachers from around the world who've contributed, teachers I've worked with over the last few years. because it's different everywhere. I agree with you. Culturally, it's varied. And then you have the crossover between menopause and aging. There is a crossover without a doubt. And whether or not you are respected in your society or not, whether you feel that or not. I had a Japanese teacher who said that for her, the concept of menopause is very much once you hit that age, that's it, you're finished. Whereas we can read about second spring, which is a Chinese medicine term, which she hadn't heard of in Japan. And, we hear that Japanese women don't have the kind of symptoms that we have. No, they have other symptoms, but also culturally, do they talk about it? Do they not talk about it? It's very individual to a culture. So I do think there is a crossover, but I really do think that there's an important role to be played in looking at menopause itself, and then remembering that state of being influences you for your ongoing aging and how you are going to live. So I don't disagree with you. I think that is a huge component as well. For me, I'm just looking at how I can help teachers. I say it's ongoing, because as you start reading and researching, you start looking at other things, you get interested in other things. And I think that's a great thing. But I think having that menopause awareness and understanding, how to help your clients, how to send them, refer them, signpost them to their general practitioners or menopause specialists, when to do it, is important in the whole process. But I do think that culturally, every experience is different.
In your experience, why do you feel like Pilates is so beneficial for women, as we go through menopause? And because it is a very, very popular activity, isn't it? Like, over the years, that has been the majority of my clients. Yeah. Why do you think it works so well for them?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because when I started teaching back in the late 90s and then opened my first studio in 2001, I got lots of women who were in this demographic coming to me, because I say lots, I'm quite rural in the UK. At that point, nobody knew what Pilates was. So I gradually got women coming, right. And often they would be referred by physiotherapists or osteopaths who had learned a bit about Pilates. So it's built up. I mean, Pilates now, compared with 25 years ago, is just incredible in terms of its popularity and why people want to do it. And I think that, I'm also a yoga teacher and a gyrotonic teacher, meditation teacher. Pilates was my first starting point in terms of mind-body trainings. And it's been my mainstay all the way through. Pilates is accessible to everybody, as long as the movements are modified to be beneficial to that individual. And that's where a Pilates teacher is very skilled, if you've done your training, because you can take an exercise and you can change it to fit that person, which is what the original concept was all about. Then if you think about this demographic, we're covering all the bases. So we're looking at breathing to help, apart from the systems in the body, physical systems, stress. It's a calming form of exercise. And we're looking at understanding how your body works, at moving your joints, at understanding how to move your spine, the hips, all these different things. So we're teaching some very basic but extremely important movement skills in a way which is accessible. And I think the type of movements, the way we can modify them, the fact that they cover all the bases, the mobility, the strength, bone loading, all the different things, the coordination, all of these things, we cover all the things women need to do. Yoga, I absolutely love, but many women don't want to do it or feel they can't do it, or they find it, it's just not what they want to go and spend an hour and a half doing. Others love it. I came to yoga in a kind of roundabout way, but I love it. But for me, it was not the right thing to be doing at this phase, even though I didn't realize it immediately. Whereas Pilates is a very balanced form of movement. And again, you can modify and make sure that your client is covering the areas that they need. Say they're very hypermobile, for example. So I think that body awareness that is also generated in how it's taught is really beneficial for women at this stage. So I think it covers everything. It's very safe and it reaches a much wider audience because it's accessible to everybody, really.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I feel like definitely the de-stressing component, learning to breathe well and even just like bringing awareness to the body, which I know yoga also encourages that, but it's taught me personally to appreciate my body so much more just by moving mindfully. And I feel like that's such a powerful tool for women, I mean, for anybody, but, for anybody who is going through body changes.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree with you. And I think also, the fact, obviously, Pilates, the mat work has come out of the studio and it's accessible to everybody. And we can use small props to create a scaffolding to help and support our clients. But the studio environment gives another level, which I think can be extremely beneficial for women who are struggling to move. The reformer, when you're looking at it on a more remedial level, so I'm not talking about dynamic reformer classes, I'm talking about the actual way you teach in a Pilates studio to support and help your clients understand what they're doing with their bodies and move with reduced pain. And I think, this equipment makes that very, very accessible. And women need to be able to feel that they're doing something which is helping themselves. And, if you go to classes and you hurt yourself constantly or you can't keep up, then it's just not going to work. It's difficult too, I know, sometimes because of costs that women can't come and do a class in a studio. But I think that if you understand this demographic and you know why that client is coming to you, in a mat class even, you can modify. And this is why I think also, you can actually create mat classes purely with a menopause focus. And that can be a way of reaching this demographic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Dinah, I know that we are on a little bit of a schedule for you. Would you like to touch on your book as we start to wrap up? Is that something that you'd like to share with our listeners?
My book, yes, I did. I have actually got a couple of copies at home, but I haven't got one here, but there's a picture. Don't know if you can see that. So it's Pilates-Based Movement for Menopause. Thank you for mentioning it. I never imagined I'd write a book. I have to say that. I felt passionate about writing the training course to try and help support teachers, which I launched in 2021. But Elizabeth Larkham, who many of you know is an incredible master teacher, is my mentor still. I took the Passing the Torch diploma with her, and I did quite a few trainings with her over the years when she was in the UK. And she very kindly supported me when I wrote the course and then said, would you like to write a book? And I said, oh, yes, thinking, no, that'll never happen. And lo and behold, it has. So the book is coming out in August. It's August 21st, 2024, published by Handspring Publishing. So it's available globally. I have tried to make it as globally accessible as possible. I'm writing in the UK, so a lot of it talks about the websites in the UK, but of course they are accessible globally. And then I do talk about resources around the world. And as I said, I've got contributions from teachers in all different places, including Australia, who talk about their experience and about where they refer their clients to get help and support in their own communities. So it's a book with resources. It's a book with stories. It's a book which has got sections in it called Think Outside the Pilates Box to encourage teachers to do different things. So I've tried, my aim was to make it a resource for menopause information. So there's evidence-based information, there's information from a menopause specialist, all about the hormones, there's stuff about the history and culture. There's also things in there for teachers' own self-development, if you want to call it that, self-support, things to help you explore your teaching and also what might help you individually. So you focus a bit on yourself. So there's a whole range of information in there. And so it can be, you can use it, you can read it all the way through, or you can just pick and mix from it. And I'm hoping it'll be a practical handbook of support, if you like, because for me, what we do is very practical. Teaching is very practical. And I love a book that you can just pull down from the shelf. You go, okay, I know it's that one. And I know if I have a quick look through here, I'll get some inspiration for what I'm doing. I'll reread something and understand a bit more. And actually, there's something in there that I can do for myself. It has got examples of mat work courses and teaching plans, this sort of thing, and then loads of resources, how to create your own resources. So it's jam-packed with all sorts of different information. And I really hope that it actually helps teachers for them and for their clients.
Oh, I have no doubt that it's going to be an amazing resource. I don't think I've ever seen a book specifically on Pilates for menopause. I'm pretty sure this is the first book that's been put out in my lifetime anyway, and I'm sure that it's gonna help a lot of people. So thank you so much for doing that. I can't imagine that it must have been a mammoth task. Goodness me. I'm sure over the time you were like, what am I doing? Just keep going. What am I doing? But
Yeah,
I would
you're not
love
wrong
to
with that.
know before we wrap I'd love to know before we wrap up, if you could speak to your younger self, on reflection of what you have learned over your career as a movement practitioner about your own body, who you are and who you are becoming, what would that conversation look like?
Oh, that's a tricky one, isn't it? Because I'm very aware that if I hadn't have had the experience I have had, I wouldn't have written this book. And actually, it's a book that I wanted over, the last 25 years. So that's a tricky one. But I would say look after yourself better because, it's easy to just not put yourself first or it's, how can I phrase it? Look after your body. As a movement practitioner, it's easy to do too much movement and you need to know when to rest and when to move. I would also say to myself that I don't need to push myself quite so hard, but I think that's what a lot of us do. And just enjoy the ride a bit more. Mostly I have, but I think it's easy to feel all the time that you're not good enough, that you need to learn more. And you know what? Actually, every Pilates teacher I've ever worked with and taught has been very super conscious about learning more and supporting their clients. As they have a fascination with movement, but also they want to support others. And I feel that it's important to say to teachers, and I would say this to myself, you're okay. You're doing all right. Just go steadily. And what you've got is sufficient. You can add to it, but you're doing a good job. And I think that's what all teachers need to hear. And I think it's something that we don't necessarily, and I think I'd probably say it to my younger self, you're doing okay. You're a single mum, you've got 3 kids, your relationships come, relationships go, parents die. But you know what? It's okay. It'll all be all right in the end. But don't be afraid to get help. That's the other thing I tell myself. Just get some help.
Mm-hmm. No, it's such a powerful message. It's such an important message for us to keep reminding each other because we are naturally service to others types of people and we put in so much energy to everybody else. But we can't have longevity in this industry if we are not putting ourselves first. And we're constantly preaching that to our clients in any case. We need to be doing it for ourselves. I hear that message loud and clear from you, my friend. So thank you for that. It's so important. Thank you so much for your time. I know that this always, takes a bit out of our day. The work that you're doing is so important for our industry, for people who are going through menopause, and I believe that this type of work is what is going to continue to elevate the Pilates industry and continue to grow communities that do have longevity that can serve other people for a long, long time to come. So thank you so much for coming to us today, Dinah. I really appreciate your time.
It's my absolute pleasure. Katie, thank you for asking me. And yes, I totally agree with you. It is about supporting community and that, we need to support ourselves within those communities. So as you said, we have longevity in the work. And yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to talk about it. And I am very passionate about it. And I really do hope that the next generations of teachers get this information much sooner because I think it will make their life easier.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Thanks again, everyone. Thank you to all of our listeners. My name's Katie Crane. I'm the Pilates professional. This is the Pilates Lounge podcast. And just remember to check out the show notes so that you can download anything that Dinah is sharing with us. You can hear all about her book. We will have some links up there on the show notes for you. I cannot wait for you to join me next Wednesday for another episode of the Pilates Lounge podcast. Thank you. Thank you.